12 world-class specialists stood around the dying king of the New York underworld, utterly defeated. They gave him 2 weeks. It wasn't a Harvard medical degree that saved the city's most feared man, but a heavy-set, debt-ridden cleaner with a rag, a bucket, and an eye for the invisible. The Costello estate sat on 80 acres of prime, heavily fortified real estate in upstate New York, a sprawling monument to old money and new blood. Inside its cold stone walls, Nicholas Costello was rotting from the inside out. Nicholas was the undisputed head of the largest organized crime syndicate on the eastern seaboard. He was a man who had survived car bombs in Palermo, assassination attempts in Chicago, and federal indictments in Manhattan. Yet, at 42 years old, he was being dismantled by an invisible enemy. Over the past 4 months, Nicholas had suffered a catastrophic physical decline. It started with severe migraines and a persistent metallic taste in his mouth, escalating into violent tremors, terrifying hallucinations, and progressive respiratory failure. His muscle mass had evaporated, leaving him a gaunt, bedridden shadow of the imposing figure who used to rule the city with absolute authority. Money was no object, and Nicholas's underboss, an impeccably dressed and ambitious man named Angelo Cortese, had spared none. Over 12 weeks, a parade of the world's most elite medical minds was quietly flown in via private helicopters to the estate's helipad. There was Dr. Richard Gable, the renowned chief of neurology from Johns Hopkins, who confidently diagnosed Nicholas with a rare, rapid-onset form of ALS, only to backtrack when the spinal tap results made no sense. There was Dr. Heinrich Vogel, a leading toxicologist from the Charité Hospital in Berlin, who ran exhaustive heavy metal panels looking for arsenic, ricin, and thallium. The tests came back clean. Dr. Gregory Lin, a specialist in infectious diseases from the Mayo Clinic, spent 5 days testing for everything from obscure tropical parasites to weaponized anthrax. He too packed his bags in defeat. In total, 12 doctors, men and women whose names were etched on hospital wings and published in the New England Journal of Medicine, stood around Nicholas's custom-built king-sized bed, debated in hushed tones, and ultimately surrendered. The consensus was a bleak, terrifying unknown. A systemic, idiopathic autoimmune collapse. They gave him 2 to 3 weeks to live. While the medical elite stared at Nicholas's blood charts, nobody looked at the room. And nobody looked at Adelaide. Adelaide Higgins was 34 years old, and by society's brutal standards, she was invisible. She weighed nearly 280 pounds, carrying the weight heavily on her broad frame. Her knees permanently ached from a lifetime of manual labor, and her blue cotton cleaning uniform was perpetually tight across her thick waist and wide hips. To the armed guards patrolling the mahogany corridors in tailored suits, Bear was less than human. She was part of the estate's infrastructure, no more consequential than the antique vases or the Persian rugs she vacuumed. They didn't see a woman drowning in medical debt from her late mother's cancer treatments. They didn't see the sharp, analytical mind that had once earned her a full scholarship to study chemistry before poverty and family tragedy forced her to drop out and pick up a mop. To the ruthless men of the Costello family, she was just the fat, slow, heavy-breathing maid, and that was exactly how Bia survived. She kept her eyes down, her mouth shut, and her hands moving. She saw everything, heard everything, and said nothing. She noticed that Angelo Cortese, the grieving underboss, had already started holding meetings in Nicholas's downstairs study, a grave breach of protocol. She noticed that the guards on the second floor had relaxed their posture, joking about sports instead of standing at attention, treating the boss's hallway less like a fortress and more like a waiting room for a funeral. But most importantly, as the days ticked down on Nicholas Costello's life, Bea noticed the dust. Bea had been assigned exclusively to the master wing of the estate because she was meticulous. She didn't just wipe surfaces, she deep cleaned them. When she entered Nicholas's cavernous, dimly lit bedroom, it smelled of stale sweat, clinical-grade bleach, and a heavy, cloying scent of eucalyptus. Nicholas lay in the center of the room, hooked up to an IV and a state-of-the-art oxygen concentrator. A bespoke imported humidifier hummed quietly in the corner, continuously pumping out a fine, aromatic mist. Angelo had brought it in weeks ago, claiming a homeopathic specialist in Geneva had recommended the custom eucalyptus and cedar oil blend to help clear Nicholas's failing lungs. "Don't touch the machine, Piggy," a guard had sneered at Bea weeks earlier when she had reached out to dust its base. "Angelo says it stays running 24/7. You unplug that, you'll be in the trunk of a Cadillac before dinner." So Bea hadn't touched it, but she watched it as the doctors came and went, drawing vials of blood and shining penlights into Nicholas's unresponsive eyes. Bea was on her hands and knees, scrubbing the baseboards. It was there, hidden in the shadows where the million-dollar doctors never looked, that Bea's sharp eyes caught a discrepancy. Along the mahogany baseboards, directly in the airflow path of the expensive humidifier, a strange residue was accumulating. It wasn't normal household dust, which is usually gray, fluffy, and composed of skin cells and fabric fibers. This dust was heavy. It had a faint, rusty orange tint, and it clung to the wood with a slightly greasy, crystallized texture. Wiping it with her rag, Bea brought the cloth close to her face. Beneath the overpowering smell of eucalyptus, her nose detected something else, a harsh, acrid undertone that smelled faintly of burnt almonds and metallic ozone. Bea froze, a cold sweat breaking out across the back of her neck. She knew that smell. Years ago, before the crushing weight of depression and debt had derailed her life, Bea had worked the night shift cleaning a commercial agricultural laboratory in New Jersey. She had spent hours scrubbing down containment rooms where scientists developed high-grade, synthetic pesticides and industrial fungicides. Her mind, buried under years of trauma and mundane labor, violently snapped into focus. She remembered a specific chemical compound from the lab, a restricted, experimental neurotoxin designed to eradicate deep-root fungal infections in commercial crops. It was heavily regulated because it was fundamentally undetectable in standard human toxicology panels. It didn't linger in the blood like arsenic or thallium. It bound itself to the lipid tissues in the brain and central nervous system, slowly shutting down the body's motor functions and respiratory system. When aerosolized and exposed to air, the chemical byproduct left behind a heavy, rusty orange, crystallized residue. It also smelled exactly like burnt almonds and metallic ozone. Bea looked up from her rag to the humming humidifier. The machine was silently pumping out a steady, beautiful plume of white mist directly over the dying Mafia Boss's bed. Angelo, Bea thought, her heart hammering against her thick ribs. He didn't need to shoot Nicholas. He's just watering him like a poisoned plant. The realization was paralyzing. If she went to the guards, they would laugh at her, or worse, tell Angelo. If she tried to tell the remaining doctors, they would dismiss her as an uneducated, overweight maid speaking out of turn. But if she did nothing, the man on the bed would be dead by the weekend, and Angelo Cortese would take the throne. Bea slowly pushed her heavy frame up from the floor, her joints popping in the quiet room. She looked at Nicholas. He was awake, though barely. His dark, sunken eyes tracked her sluggishly. He looked like a ghost trapped in a dying vessel. Despite his ruthless reputation, Bea had only ever experienced a bizarre, gruff kindness from him. Months ago, when a young capo had mocked B's size in the kitchen, Nicholas had quietly walked in, taken the capo's espresso, poured it over the man's expensive shoes, and told him to apologize to the lady. She couldn't let him die like this. Moving with a speed that defied her size, B waddled over to the bathroom, grabbing a heavy-duty hazardous waste bag from her cart. She returned to the bedroom, checking the hallway. The two guards were standing down by the stairwell, deeply engrossed in a debate about baseball. B stepped up to the expensive Swiss humidifier. She didn't just unplug it. She grabbed the entire water reservoir, unscrewed the cap, and poured the remaining oily, fragrant liquid into her heavy-duty plastic bag, sealing it tight. Then she took a bottle of standard distilled water from her cleaning cart, scrubbed the inside of the machine's tank raw with a bleach wipe, and refilled it with pure, clean water. She plugged it back in. The mist resumed, but this time it was just water. Over the next 4 days, a silent, terrifying game of chess began. Ba took on extra shifts, begging the head housekeeper for overtime to help pay her mother's debts. She made sure she was the only one cleaning the master suite. Every morning, Angelo would personally come in, express his deep, agonizing sorrow to the unconscious Nicholas, and casually pour a small vial of his special eucalyptus oil into the humidifier. And every afternoon, while the guards were changing shifts, the fat, invisible maid would trudge into the room, dump the poisoned water into her sealed bag, scrub the tank, and replace it with clean water. On the 5th day, the impossible happened. Dr. Gable, who had returned to sign the expected death certificate, walked out of the master suite, looking like he had seen a phantom. "His vitals," the doctor stammered to Angelo in the hallway, unaware that Bea was slowly mopping the floor just 10 feet away. "His oxygen saturation is up to 94%. The tremors have subsided. I can't explain it. It's like his nervous system is suddenly rebooting." Angelo's face remained a mask of profound relief. But B, watching the reflection in the polished marble floor, saw his jaw clench so hard, a muscle twitched violently in his cheek. "A miracle, Doctor," Angelo said smoothly. "Keep monitoring him." B knew she was running out of time. Angelo wasn't a fool. If Nicholas started recovering, Angelo would realize the environmental poisoning wasn't working. He would have to switch to something faster. A pillow over the face in the dead of night. A lethal injection masquerading as pain meds. That night, Bea made a desperate choice. She waited until 2 a.m. The estate was eerily quiet. She used her master key card, a perk of being the lowest rung on the ladder, trusted only because she was deemed too stupid to be a threat, to slip into Nicholas's dark bedroom. She needed to take the humidifier entirely and hide it as evidence, replacing it with a decoy from the guest wing. As she reached for the plug, a cold, metallic click echoed in the darkness. "Take your hand off the machine, B." B froze. She slowly turned her heavy body around. Sitting up in the bed, looking gaunt and pale in the moonlight, but with a terrifying, razor-sharp clarity in his dark eyes, was Nicholas Castello. And resting steady in his trembling, emaciated hand, aimed directly at her chest, was a suppressed 9mm Beretta. He had been pretending to be asleep. "I've been watching you," Nicholas whispered, his voice like grinding gravel. "Every day this week. You dump my medicine. You scrub the machine. And suddenly, my head is clear for the first time in months." He cocked the hammer back, Who sent you? Who are you working for? B stood paralyzed, the barrel of the gun looking like a black cavern. Her heart pounded furiously, but a strange, deep-seated anger suddenly overrode her fear. She had spent her entire life being pushed around, underestimated, and ignored. She wasn't going to let this dying gangster shoot her for saving his life. "Put the gun down, Mr. Costello," B said, her voice surprisingly steady, lacking the submissive quiver he was used to hearing from his subordinates. "If I was sent to kill you, I wouldn't be dumping your expensive bathwater down the toilet. I'd have just let your best friend finish the job." Nicholas's eyes narrowed. "Explain." "Your doctors are idiots," B stated bluntly, wiping her sweaty palms on her uniform. "They're looking for zebras when there's a horse in the room. You don't have an autoimmune disease. You have chemical-induced demyelination." Nicholas lowered the gun a fraction of an inch. "What?" "It's an agricultural neurotoxin. It binds to the fatot in your brain. Angelo has been pouring it into your humidifier, masked by that eucalyptus crap. You've been breathing it in for 4 months. 12 doctors couldn't find it because it doesn't show up in blood tests. But it leaves a crystallized, rusty residue on the baseboards." She pointed a chubby finger at the floor. "I used to clean an agrochemical lab. I know the smell. I've been swapping your poisoned water with distilled water for 5 days. That's why you're holding a gun on me right now, instead of choking on your own spit." Silence stretched in the dark room, heavy and suffocating. Nicholas stared at the overweight, sweating cleaner in the cheap blue uniform. He looked at the humidifier, then at the baseboards she had pointed to. The pieces of the puzzle, clouded by months of neurological decay, rapidly snapped together in his ruthless mind. The private meetings downstairs. Angelo's insistence on the specific homeopathic treatment. Nicholas lowered the gun, resting it on his blanket. He took a deep, shuddering breath of the clean air. "You," Nicholas breathed, a dark, dangerous smile slowly spreading across his gaunt face, "are severely underpaid, B." But before another word could be spoken, the heavy mahogany door to the bedroom clicked open. A sliver of hallway light cut across the room, illuminating Angelo Cortese. In his hand was a syringe, and his eyes locked directly onto B. Angelo Cortese stood framed in the heavy mahogany doorway, the dim hallway light casting long, sinister shadows across his tailored Tom Ford suit. In his right hand, a medical syringe caught the pale moonlight filtering through the bulletproof windows. For 3 agonizing seconds, no one moved. The only sound in the cavernous master suite was the quiet, innocent hum of the newly cleaned humidifier, pumping pure, unpoisoned water into the air. Angelo's eyes darted from the heavy-duty plastic bag clutched in Adelaide's fist to the trembling, suppressed Beretta in Nicholas's skeletal hand. The underboss was a master of reading rooms, and the geometry of this one had just shifted catastrophically against him. Yet Angelo was a sociopath draped in cashmere. He didn't panic. He smiled. "Nicholas, thank God," Angelo murmured, his voice as smooth as aged bourbon, stepping fully into the room and letting the door click shut behind him. "You're lucid. Dr. Gable said the hallucinations might cause night terrors. I brought your lorazepam. You need to rest, boss." Nicholas's breathing was shallow, his chest rattling, but his eyes were entirely clear. The neurotoxin had stopped actively attacking his brain synapses hours ago. "Lorazepam?" Nicholas rasped, the gun wavering slightly as his severely atrophied muscles struggled to hold the 2-pound weapon. "Is that what we're calling it now, Angelo? Is that before or after you water my plants?" Angelo stopped at the foot of the bed. His eyes flicked to Adelaide, his expression hardening into a mask of pure disgust. "I don't know what this fat cow has been whispering to you, Nicholas, but she's clearly disturbed your equipment. Look at her. She's stealing from you. Put the gun down before you hurt yourself." "She didn't whisper anything," Nicholas ground out, his finger tightening on the trigger. "She just cleaned up your mess. I smell the ammonia, Angelo. I smell the ozone. You've been gassing me in my own bed." Angelo calculated his odds. Nicholas was awake, but he was 70 pounds underweight and shaking like a leaf in a hurricane. The maid was massive, sluggish, and paralyzed by fear, currently backed against her yellow plastic cleaning cart. The facade dropped. Angelo's handsome face twisted into a feral sneer. "You were taking too long to die, Dom." Angelo spat, his voice dropping the supportive undertone. "The commission in Chicago is restless. The Port Authority deals are stalling because nobody respects a ghost in a bed. I was doing this family a favor. A clean, untraceable medical tragedy." Suddenly, Nicholas's arm gave out. The intense surge of adrenaline that had woken him finally evaporated, leaving his ravaged nervous system completely drained. His wrist buckled, the heavy beretta slipping from his grip and clattering uselessly onto the thick Persian rug. Angelo didn't hesitate. He dropped the syringe, reaching into the breast pocket of his suit and drawing a compact, suppressed Walther PPK. He aimed it squarely at Nicholas's chest. "Heart attack," Angelo said coldly. "Tragic." He never pulled the trigger. Adelaide Higgins had spent 34 years making herself small. She had endured the mockery of her peers, the crushing weight of her mother's hospital bills, and the daily humiliation of scrubbing the toilets of men who viewed her as a subhuman appliance. But beneath her heavy exterior beat the heart of a survivor, fueled by a deeply buried, fiercely intelligent rage. As Angelo raised the gun, Bea didn't scream. She didn't cower. She reached behind her onto the top tray of her cart and grabbed a large industrial spray bottle of heavy-duty, commercial-grade alkaline floor stripper, a highly corrosive, undiluted chemical solvent used to dissolve wax and grease. With a roar that tore from the bottom of her lungs, Bea lunged forward and squeezed the industrial trigger twice. A thick, concentrated stream of alkaline foam hit Angelo directly in the eyes. The hitman's scream was instantaneous and inhuman. The gun fired blindly into the ceiling, raining plaster down on the bed as Angelo dropped the weapon and clawed at his burning face. The caustic chemicals immediately began eating at his corneas, blinding him in a haze of agonizing fire. But Bea wasn't done. Angelo, blinded and thrashing, stumbled backward toward the door. Bea knew if he got to the hallway, he would alert the guards who were on his payroll. She couldn't let him leave. Closing the distance with the momentum of a freight train, Bea threw her entire body weight directly at the stumbling underboss. 280 pounds of raw, unbridled desperation slammed into Angelo's chest. The impact was devastating. Angelo's ribs cracked audibly as the sheer mass of the woman drove him backward. They hit the mahogany door together with a deafening crash before tumbling to the floor. Angelo was lean and fit, but he was trapped under a mountain of dead weight, blinded and suffocating. Bea straddled him, pinning his arms beneath her thick knees. She grabbed his cashmere lapels in her calloused, bleach-stained hands and slammed his head back into the hardwood floor. Once. Twice. Angelo went completely limp. The room plunged into heavy silence, save for Bea's ragged, heaving breaths. She remained on top of the unconscious man, her uniform soaked in sweat, waiting for the retaliation, waiting to be killed by whoever came through the door next. The door violently swung open, knocking into B's hip. Sullivan, Nicholas's notoriously brutal head of security, a man whose loyalty to the Costello family was matched only by his ruthlessness, burst in, a tactical shotgun raised to his shoulder. 2 more armed guards flooded in behind him. They froze, taking in the chaotic tableau. The ceiling dusted with plaster. Their boss collapsed but breathing on the bed, and the overweight invisible maid sitting on the chest of the bleeding, unconscious underboss. Sullivan leveled the shotgun at B's head. "Don't move." "Lower the weapon, Sully." Nicholas's voice cracked from the bed, weak but dripping with undeniable authority. Sullivan blinked, looking at his boss. "Mr. Costello, Angelo is a rat," Nicholas gasped, clutching his chest, but forcing himself to sit upright against the headboard. "He poisoned the air supply. He tried to finish the job tonight." Nicholas coughed violently, pointing a shaking finger at Bear. "Get him out from under her. Take him to the soundproof room in the basement. He doesn't die until I can hold the pliers myself." The guards roughly hauled the groaning, chemically blinded Angelo out from under Bear, dragging him out into the hallway like a sack of garbage. Sullivan holstered his weapon and looked at Bear, who was slowly pulling herself up, her knees popping loudly in the quiet room. She retrieved her fallen spray bottle, placed it neatly on her cart, and smoothed down her wrinkled blue uniform. Nicholas looked at her, a profound mix of shock, respect, and terrifying calculation in his dark eyes. "Sullivan," Nicholas ordered softly, "lock down the estate and get the lady a chair." The recovery of Nicholas Costello became the stuff of medical legend. Dr. Gable and the team from Johns Hopkins authored a heavily redacted paper in a prominent medical journal, citing a miraculous, spontaneous remission of a severe, idiopathic neurological collapse. Nicholas allowed them to take the credit, happily signing non-disclosure agreements that ensured no one looked too closely at his blood work. Angelo Cortese was never seen again. The official word on the street was that he had absconded to South America with a mistress and a skimmed million from the Union pension funds. The truth was buried in a 55-gallon drum of quicklime beneath a newly poured foundation in Queens. 1 month after the night of the attack, the Costello estate had returned to its fortress-like efficiency. Nicholas sat behind his massive oak desk in the downstairs study. He had regained 20 pounds, the grey pallor of his skin replaced by a healthy, olive complexion. The tremors were completely gone. The double doors to the study opened, and Sullivan escorted Adelaide inside. She no longer wore the tight blue polyester cleaning uniform. Instead, she was dressed in a custom-tailored, dark charcoal pantsuit that draped elegantly over her broad frame. Her hair was professionally styled, and the heavy bags of exhaustion under her eyes had faded. But she was still B. She hadn't shrunk herself to fit their world. She had forced their world to accommodate her size. 2 weeks prior, Nicholas had anonymously wired $5 million to a shell company in B's name, wiping out her mother's medical debts and setting her up for life. She had fully expected to be fired, or quietly disposed of, to protect the secret of how weak the boss had truly been. Instead, he had summoned her to the study. "Sit, Adelaide," Nicholas said, gesturing to the plush leather armchair opposite his desk. He poured 2 glasses of 20-year-old Macallan and slid one across the polished wood. She sat, taking the glass. "Thank you, Mr. Costello." "I owe you my life," Nicholas began, leaning back in his chair. "And I owe you an apology. I employed hundreds of men with guns, degrees, and titles. But I was saved by a woman holding a rag, whom I paid minimum wage." B took a sip of the scotch. It burned beautifully. "I just noticed the dust, sir." "You noticed everything," Nicholas corrected sharply. You understand the chemistry of poisons. You understand how people move in this house. But most importantly, Adelaide, you understand how to exploit the fact that arrogant men refuse to look at you. They look right past you. That makes you the most dangerous person in my organization. He slid a thick leather folder across the desk. I don't need a cleaner anymore, Nicholas said. I need a shield. I want you to head my internal operations and estate security. You vet every piece of food, every drop of water, every new hire, and every business partner that walks through those gates. B opened the folder. Inside was a contract with an astronomical salary, full operational authority over Sullivan's men, and a mandate to completely restructure the estate's security matrix. I don't know anything about running a mafia family's security, Mr. Costello, B said honestly, though her eyes scanned the contract with sharp, analytical precision. You don't need to know how to run a family, Nicholas smiled, a genuine, warm expression. You just need to know how to spot the poison before it hits the lungs. Can you do it? B closed the folder and met the gaze of the most dangerous man in New York. Yes, but we're doing things my way. Over the next 6 months, the underworld quickly learned that the path to Nicholas Costello went through a heavy-set, fiercely intelligent woman who missed absolutely nothing. Beer implemented sweeping changes to the organization's defensive posture. Environmental protocols, complete overhaul of the estate's HVAC and water filtration systems, monitored via independent chemical sensors that B personally calibrated, supplier audits. Every catering company, pharmaceutical supplier, and domestic staffing agency contracted by the family was subjected to rigorous, deep-cover background checks. The Invisible Network. Bayet established a covert intelligence ring comprised entirely of overlooked personnel, valets, coat-check girls, hotel maids, and janitors across the city, turning the city's invisible workforce into an impenetrable spy network for the Costello family. On a cold night in December, Nicholas held a sit-down with the heads of the 5 families at an exclusive Tribeca loft to negotiate the lucrative waterfront development contracts. The room was thick with cigar smoke and tension, filled with ruthless, tailored men. Standing quietly in the corner, holding a tablet and watching the room with hawk-like precision, was Adelaide. A rival boss from Brooklyn, a notoriously arrogant man named Sal Morano, glanced at her and scoffed. "Dom, we're talking private business. Tell your secretary to wait in the hall." Nicholas paused, putting down his cigar. He looked at Morano, his eyes devoid of any warmth. "That isn't my secretary, Sal," Nicholas said softly, the silence in the room instantly becoming absolute. "That is Adelaide, and if she tells me the air in this room is bad, you won't make it to the elevators." Morano swallowed hard, suddenly intensely aware of the heavy woman in the corner. Bear simply smiled, tapping a stylus against her tablet, utterly unbothered, untouchable, and finally seen. If this story of betrayal, intellect, and ultimate revenge kept you on the edge of your seat, smash that like button. It's wild how the most overlooked people in the room can hold the keys to life and death. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and ring the bell so you never miss another deep dive into the dark, dramatic, true-life stories of the underworld. Share this video with someone who loves a brilliant plot twist. See you next time.